Okay, hello everyone. I want to walk through the creation of a simple to-do app step by step with Gun. The idea is that this is going to enable us to make a decentralized web app in pure HTML and JavaScript in just 71 lines of code. And this is all going to be possible because Gun is a decentralized database that was created to just work on web technologies. So we're going to include it in a script include in just a single HTML file. So the order I'm going in is in the typical create, read, update, delete kind of flow, the typical CRUD app as they call it. So just kind of walking through this code here, we're starting with creating data. So what you'll want to do is have your basic HTML outline here with HTML, and then you have the head, and then you have the body, right? And then you'll want to define your basic structure of your HTML for creating data here. So for this, we just have a simple header and a simple input box, right? And the input has an onChange listener that's add to do, right? So when we enter some text and hit the enter key, it's going to trigger this add to do function. And now down below the HTML, schema here, down below we have our actual script, right? And this is just 34 lines right now. So we're including Gun in the script from the JSDeliver CDN. And the cool part about this is that, for example, in the future, you could even include Gun through the SIA decentralized CDN if you wanted to. So yeah, that's SIA. So in the actual logic here, the first thing that we need to do is actually instantiate Gun, right, from this script here. So Gun equals Gun there. And then what we're going to do is set an easy variable for Gun app graph, and that's going to be equal to gun.get_to-dos. So the reason that I'm doing this is because in the future we might actually want to change where our main app is kind of located here. So we might want to change the name of this, for example, or we might want to add like a namespace where it would be something like that. And so just setting it to a variable just kind of helps us out for now in the future. And then the next thing is local data here, and I'll get to that down below. So the add to do is your basic kind of onChange listener where it's getting this here, so it's passing in the element, which will be the input box itself, and we're going to say console log setting whatever this is set to the Gun graph, and then I'm just getting a date, and then what I'm doing is I'm attaching this information as an object to Gun app graph up here. So this would be the same thing if I did this here, it's the same exact thing, right? Gun.getToDos.set that. Okay. Now I made a note here that when I'm setting this on the graph node, right? The graph node is just our to-dos. That's a node on the graph. When I do .set, it's the same exact thing as doing .getRandom.put. So what it's doing is it's actually saying you can kind of think of it like this in simplistic terms. You can kind of think of it like, well, in our case, it's going to be to-dos, and then to-dos is set to something like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then within that we have thing, blah, 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 time created, blah, 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 and then status. Like that. So this is the kind of structure that you can think of our node as having, right? So when we do gunapp graph dot get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dot put, you know, we could overwrite, for example, the thing in there, right? And that would be changing this thing right here. So it takes a little bit to get used to like the difference between working with straight up normal JSON versus working with a graph kind of structure like this. But you can kind of just think of them as like JSON accessors, kind of like you're following from here to here to here down the line. It's kind of like Ruby has like a dive or like a dig function where you can like dig into JSON down the thing, down the row. Anyway, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense there, but what I'm doing with set is I'm giving this item a name, and then I'm putting these elements within that. Okay. And then I'm just erasing the input text after I do that. Okay, so let's see the page in particular. I'll pull up the browser here. All right, so we just have our to-do app, and I'll just do hello, boom. And you'll see that it gets outputted to the console, but you see our text here, setting hello to gun graph, right? That's what we pointed out before. Now let's go on to the listener part, which is the more interesting part down here. So we have gunappgraph.map.on. Okay, so remember that gunappgraph is going to be the same thing as this, gun.getToDos.map.on. Okay, so this is saying for each child node underneath this to-dos node, right? We're going to put an on listener. Okay, so that's what map is doing. For each child node of to-dos, we're saying put a listener on it. Okay, and what that listener is going to do is allow us to do things every time that thing gets updated. Okay, so in our case, right off the bat here, all we're going to do is a simple console log, and we're going to notify ourselves via the console that it was updated, right? And we're going to say updating local data, and we're going to set our local data equal to this information here. So this can be a little bit tricky here as well. So let me explain something real quick. This .on listener here, it's passing in, I have it named as node and node ID so that it makes a little bit more sense with the graph understanding. So the idea is that node is actually going to be this thing here, right? And node ID is going to actually be like this part here. Because remember when I said .set is the same thing as .get.put here? The node ID is going to be this random number here, okay? And then we're logging that to the console. The reason that I'm setting it to local data as like a local object here is so that in the future, if you want to, it's kind of a good pattern to follow, because in the future, if you want to do some transformations of gun data that you receive, it's easier to kind of handle that as a middleware. So I'll just put up on the screen this thing here. So the idea is that you have, when something happens in the UI, right? Like when we enter text into the input field and we hit enter, it's going to send that update to gun, right? And gun is going to detect and then set that as well. And then the listener is going to set the local variable, and then it's going to render the local variable in the UI. So the local variable is going to be kind of a middleware in between the UI and gun. And that's going to allow you in the future to be a little bit more flexible with like restructuring data. So let's look at this in practice here. So I'll just do another test. I'll just say 1, 2, 3, right? So you can see setting to gun graph, and then this is updating local data, right? So it just goes in order like the flow that I pointed out here. Okay, so when it says setting to gun graph, that's the UI, and then gun is saying in the on listener that, hey, this was updated, I'm going to update local data, right? And we haven't done any rendering yet. Okay, so let me go back to the code here. I think I'll move on from here because things will make a little bit more sense as we go, I think. So I'll go on to reading data now. So for this, what I want to do is add a list in the HTML that we can actually print out the to-do information on. So I just added a little unordered list there. Okay. And I'm trying to think of what else is different here. We have the same exact add to do that's going to be listening to the input function. We have the same exact on listeners, right? The only difference here is that I added a render list function. So every single time that a piece of information on a to-do gets updated, I'm going to re-render the list up here. Okay, so that's the main thing that's new in this reading data file. So we added the render list function, and then the function is defined down here. So all I'm really doing in here then is I'm completing the last part of the flow, right? Where we have, okay, gun saying, okay, this updated, I'm going to update the local variable, and then I'm going to render the local data. Okay, so we're completing that last part of the flow. So render list, I'm just going to print out, these console logs are really useful to ensure that the flow of our app is going in the order that we expect it to, right? So we're going to have it print re-rendering UI, and then I'm just going to firstly grab the correct HTML element up here, right? So I'll say get element by ID to-do list. So I have that. Then I'm going to set the fundamental thing that it's doing is it's completely clearing out the existing inner HTML of this list, and then it's setting the new inner HTML of the list. Okay. So yeah, that, and then like all that's happening here is we are iterating over the local data, the local data object, right? The local variables. So we're saying for each ID and node of information, we're going to build up this HTML, and then we're going to insert the HTML into the to-do list. So we also have it printing for each object. We'll have it print the data in the object just so we can inspect that. But basically the HTML is just going to be an li element, just like this. And it's going to have the ID set to the node ID, and the class set to node.status, and we're going to actually have time created and the actual thing in there. That's going to be our to-do, actual, like what the to-do is, like the string. Now the reason I did it like this, this is actually called two-way data binding, where you actually want to bake into the HTML the data information, right? So we want to put the actual node ID as the ID of the HTML element. And that's going to be more obvious why we want to do that in the updating and deleting sections. Okay, so for now we have ID is node ID and class is node status. So this it'll become a lot more clear why we want to do that in a second. So let's look at it in action here. So we'll move on to 2 here, and I'll say 1, 2, 3. Okay, and there we go. You should see that it's rendered there. We can add 4, 5 and 6, whatever, sick. So you can see that the flow is exactly the same as before, where it's setting to the gun graph. The .map.on listener is saying, hey, this was updated, and that, you know, so when I add something, 7 says, hey, this was updated. I'm going to update local data, and then I'm going to re-render the UI, and then in that rendering loop, it's going to say, hey, rendering this one, now this one, now this one, now this one, now this one, you know, and it gets more as it goes, obviously. So this is all good. Now, this is only create and read. We need the update and delete. So this is where it gets a little bit more interesting here. So going back to the code now, I'll go back to this here, the 1.3, updating data. So this is, I'll just point out the stuff that changed here. We added a little styling. So this is because we actually, when we created this HTML for each list element, we set the class equal to the node status. So that means that if we set the node status to completed, then it has a completed CSS class on it automatically. So that's what this style is going to hook into, and it's going to do a strike through style on the font. So the only thing that's new here, we have add, the listener, we have the render function, and down here, this is our update right here. So you'll notice primarily that when we build this list element now, we actually added a button onto it. So each list element is going to have a button next to it that says change status. And the onClick is just going to be the change status function, and it's going to accept this right there. So in the change status function, it's going to take the element here, but I actually want to show you how to do this on the command line first, because I think it becomes a little bit more clear actually what's happening. So I'll just do 1. Now, if I do gun.getToDos, right, because this is our main node here, and then I say get, let's see, it'll be this ID here. So I'll copy that, and I'll put that in here, and I'll say put status completed. So what I'm doing is I'm updating the status child node of this one, of this to-do node here. So when I hit enter, you'll see that it gets the strike through, because in the on listener, it's calling that re-render function, right? So when it re-renders, you'll see that it now has the class completed on it, right? Because the class is tied to the data point of status here. Pretty slick, right? And you'll see that it works with the button as well. So we can just click the button. And one of the cool things about this pure HTML and JavaScript is like it's instantaneous, right? It's instant. I mean, you don't need Vue or React or Mithril or these kinds of things to get this kind of like super fast interactivity, which is kind of nice. You wouldn't know that if you didn't try to do this, right? If you were just reading a bunch of React articles, you would think, oh, I need React in order to do this, right? But here you go, right? Just regular JavaScript. So let me go back to the code here. So yeah, that's how to do it on the browser console, right? But the function, all the function is doing is taking the element, right? Because in change status, it passes in the button element, and it's saying, okay, get the parent element of the button, and that's going to equal whatever li is directly above the button, right? And then you can say get the parent element ID, and that's going to be whatever the parent ID is up here, right? And because we set this up in a really cool way where the data is binding together, whatever ID is on that list element is going to be exactly the information that you need in order to change the data, right? So we have the node ID, and we can console log changing status of node ID in GunGraph because that's what we're about to do. And we just have a little logic to toggle whatever that current status is. So we'll say if the class list of the parent li contains completed, if it's already completed, then we want to set the status to active. Otherwise, it starts off as active, so we want to set it to completed. So that's how that works. I don't think I need to go over that again. Now, deleting is going to be very, very much similar, okay? All of this code is exactly the same, except in the render, we added another button, and this button is going to be our delete button here. And in the same way, we just have an on-click function called delete thing, and it's going to take the button element, right? And we're going to test it out in the same way on the command line here. So I'll go back to the browser, and we'll go into here, and we'll say 1, and you'll see we have the 2 buttons, but we'll try it out on the command line first, and we'll say grab this node ID that got printed, and we're actually going to do something called tombstone. Rest in peace, whatever this node is. But basically, you're saying, this whole node, I'm just going to put null, right? So there will not be how it says thing time created status. These 3 things will not exist anymore. It'll just be a single null now. So when I do that, you'll see that thing disappears, right? And we can do it the same way by hitting the button, delete, right? So if we go back to the code, let's see. I'm managing a lot of screens here. How I actually had to add a little bit of a conditional here in the render because we don't want the null nodes to display, right? So I say only if the node doesn't equal null, right? Then do this stuff. But if the node equals null, then we're not going to do anything. So I don't even need an else after that, right? Just don't do anything, right? And then down here in the actual logic for the button click listener for delete thing function, it's very similar to change status. The only different thing that I'm doing is I'm saying get node ID dot put, and then I put a null there instead. And it's very clean the way that this is set up, where as soon as that change is detected, the on function calls render, and render is going to say, all right, this node is null, so I'm not gonna render anything. I'm not gonna do anything, right? So it just deletes cleanly. So that's pretty much the bulk of the logic there. Now we want to do something really fun, right? This is the whole point of using the decentralized database GunDB. So we want to take the app online. So the code in here is all the same, right? It has change status, delete thing, render list, etc., etc. None of this up here changed. The only thing that changed here is the way that we instantiate gun. So you look back here. You look back here at the old one, and there's nothing in this constructor, right? But if we put a couple of gun servers, they're called peers, P-E-E-R. If we put a couple of gun peers, which are basically servers, into the constructor as a list, then we're going to be able to communicate with other people on other devices, okay? So I have that loaded up in the browser, so I'm going to switch over to Edge again. Okay, so this is taking it online here. You see there's a bunch of crap in here because I was already using this. So I'll just clear the console so it's more clear. But I basically loaded up this file into CodePen as well. Okay, so what you can do is you can go to CodePen or JS Fiddle or anything like that, and you can just copy the whole file and paste it into the HTML section, and it'll work just the same as like your local over here. So these are effectively two different users, right? So I can say one from my local machine, right? One from my local machine, and over here, ta-da, one from my local machine. And then I can say two from CodePen, and over here, two from CodePen, right? And that's not even from local conf. That's not even the coolest part. The coolest part is I do change status and it updates over here, right? And I do change status and it updates over there, and I can do delete, and that thing is gone. So this is pretty, pretty insane, right? Like with a simple HTML file, you're able to get this interactivity over the internet, right? Now, the question is, who has the ability to change this data and read this data, right? Well, the answer right now is pretty much everybody, right? Pretty much everybody could go and do a gun.get to-dos and start monkeying around with your to-do list, right? So I hope in the next tutorials that I can talk a little bit more about how to solve for that problem, right? So what we would do is create a special namespace where only certain people can change the data. Maybe we can prove who posted the data, and you can only accept data from someone else. So we'll get into that later. That's it for now. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Thanks. Bye.